Ibon, welcome to 10 Minute Talks. Today's conversation is a little different. We will be talking about gang violence and sustainable peace.
Today, I am joined by Dr. Adam Baird. Adam is a researcher and practitioner working on armed violence prevention, gangs, and organized crime, with a strong focus on Latin America and the Caribbean. He is widely known for his work on masculinities and violence, including ideas like chronic vulnerability and masculine vulnerability, which help explain why violence persists in many urban communities and have informed United Nations decision on violence prevention. Adam has carried out more than 2 decades of research across Central America, and in 2024, he published From South Central to Southside, a book that looked at gang transnationalism, gender, and vulnerability in Belize City.
Welcome, Dr. Adam. You have spoken with gang members in places like Trinidad and Jamaica. When you think about those conversations, what common patterns or root causes of gang violence have you observed across these contexts?
I mean, that's a good question. When I'd say, I'd add to Jamaica and Trinidad, a lot of work in Colombia as well. Also in Belize, I've spoken to gang members in Guatemala and lots of different places. And my most recent work is a book I've written on Belize on gang violence. I think what's striking, if you work in multi-country sites, is that you see that gang members come from the same place. And so maybe, for your listeners, let me just put forward one concept, right? So we get chronic violence in the same location. So you tend to get these poor urban settings where young disenfranchised men are engaging in gang violence. Now, the first thing to say is that the vast majority of poor young men do not engage in gang violence. However, you only need a small percentage of young men to do so, even 5%, as low as 5% in a community to have a very violent community, which feels like it's gang saturated. So when I've worked across these contexts, Medellin in Colombia, Belize City in Belize, Kingston in Jamaica, Port of Spain in Trinidad, Guatemala City, what I noticed was these guys, Los Angeles as well, in the USA, these young men come from a background or a setting which is very similar. And I describe this in my recent book on Belize as a position of chronic vulnerability. So they come from communities. If you think of South Central LA, you think about Lavantil in the Port of Spain, you think about some of the poor comunas in Medellin and Southside Belize City. They all have a shared socioeconomic exclusion, which is long lasting across generations. Now, what you tend to get in those settings are disenfranchised, frustrated, often intelligent young men who are looking to become men, make a future for themselves, find dignity and esteem in those settings. And when there aren't any dignified opportunities, that's when pathways into criminality and into gang life becomes attractive. So what I found striking in all of the places that I worked with is it's very contingent is a word I use. So it's that comes from sort of moral philosophy, contingency, right? So if you have chronic vulnerability, that's a contingent factor which generates gang membership. So the guys who join gangs from South Central share common problems with the guys who join gangs from Southside Belize City or in the poor comunas neighborhoods in Medellin, the same in places like Lavantil in the Port of Spain, and the same in disenfranchised places, in downtown Western Kingston in Jamaica. So what this tells us is that there is a social terrain or fundamental social conditions which underpin gang presence, gang activity, gang criminality, and gang violence. So that's like a slightly long-winded way of explaining your question, but there are all these commonalities that we need to look at. Back to you, Harsha.
All right. Gang violence is often, Adam, described as very complex, which much like other deep social conflict. Based on what you have seen and heard, what do you think a sustainable approach to reduce gang violence looks like
Mhm.
beyond short term enforcement?
Yeah, I mean, I think so. I mean, from my sort of sociological perspective, gang violence stems from this chronic vulnerability in the social terrain, which I just explained. But to put it in more, like layman's terms, something was perhaps a little bit easier to digest for anyone listening. It just means you need to find dignified opportunities for people in these settings. And there's some research done in Southern Africa, and it was actually looking at reducing men's violence in general. This actually looked at domestic violence and sexual and gender-based violence, and they found that the greatest impact they had was when they focused on finding men decent opportunities, work opportunities, and then also getting rid of some of the liquor stores on every corner, right? So reducing alcohol consumption effectively, but fundamentally finding men decent and dignified opportunities had a massive impact upon levels of domestic violence. So I think what this tells us, especially in gang settings and some of the gang programs I've worked on, is that if you give the disenfranchised young men opportunities, a number of those men will take them. So you tend to find extreme gang violence in places where they have very high inequality, places like the United States of America, places like Central America, places like, across the Caribbean. So how do you generate dignified economic opportunities in these settings where you have such crushing inequality? So I think anyone working in programs and responses, I think they need to look at two things. I think one, they need to look at generating socioeconomic opportunities for all young people in these settings. And in gang settings, it's young men who end up in these spaces. So you need a gender-based approach. What would a dignified male, masculine, or an opportunity that appeals to young men look like within that particular setting? If you can find the answer to that and then deliver it, you'll turn back gang violence overnight. I mean, you said it's complicated. It's difficult to deliver those type of focused projects, but the answer is quite simple. If you can deliver those projects, you'll have a huge impact and a sustained impact on gang violence. The difficulty is in, why aren't we delivering those projects? I mean, I think that's the broader, more intractable problem that we have, especially, as we had a conversation before we recorded this, the implosion of humanitarian work globally is going to have a devastating effect on levels of gang violence. And I fully expect it to rise because programs in poor neighborhoods are being cut across the board.
All right. From all the conversation you have had with gang members, what's one insight that you really stayed with you and changed how you personally think about violence?
Mm-hmm. Well, I think that's a really good question. I mean, I think perhaps the most important thing is the empathetic perspective to humanize, these individuals. I think what we're saying in these settings, when you find people who are engaged in criminal activity, they may have committed homicides or murders, etc. I mean, they should face the rule of law. But when I speak to these young people, it's quite clear that they come from these particular demographics. And if there were a set of opportunities which were better, a lot, not all of them, but a lot more of these young people would take them. So, gang members can, they can be very varied. I don't think they fit a specific profile, but they definitely come from the same types of neighborhoods. And I think what strikes me is a lot of these young men, if they're given opportunities which give them some kind of dignity, a little bit of status, if you just offer them a job sweeping the streets, it's not going to be particularly effective, right? So what sort of bright future can we offer these young people, boys and also girls, but young boys who may end up in gangs? What sort of futures can we offer them? And I think that's what stands out to me. And a lot of them have these, sort of deviation points, often when they're in their early teens, where they ended up getting into trouble. And that's linked to the poor quality of schooling, the structural problems that they have at home. They're single parent households where the mother has to go and work in the middle of town, which is hours away from where they live. There's no after school care. The kids are left on the streets. All these sort of structural problems related to poverty, etc. So I think my takeaway would be that. I mean, these are young men, like I was, like you were, Harsha, as well. And if you don't get decent opportunities put in front of you or manufactured for you or provided for you, or at least on your horizon, then it's very easy to fall into these cycles of crime and violence when the gang is offering you a salary and status and fun and parties and all these sorts of things, so we have to counter that. And these young men, what I've learned, perhaps the big takeaway is that they'll take these opportunities if we offer them to them. A lot of them will. So we need to, I think it's our responsibility to manufacture those.
Thank you so much, Dr. Adam. It was really a pleasure to speaking with you.
You too, Harsha. Always a pleasure. Lovely to see you.